The morning sun poured like honey across the golden fields of the Iowa countryside, wrapping the old farmhouse in a soft, glowing warmth. I stood by the window, cradling a chipped ceramic mug filled with black coffee, no sugar, no cream, just the way Thomas used to drink it. This farm, this land, and this very room had been my world for over 35 years. Every scratch on the wood floor, every creak in the old staircase, held echoes of a life that had slowly faded into memory. My heart fluttered with recollections, bittersweet and stubbornly alive, like the wildflowers that grew uninvited along the fence. Mother's Day was always special to me. Not because I expected grand gestures, but because it reminded me of the bond one once shared with my son, Daniel. I remembered the tiny fingers that once gripped mine, the little voice that said, "I love you, Mama," like it was the most sacred truth. Those were the days when just a handmade card or a dandelion bouquet from the backyard could melt my heart. So that Sunday, I sat by the window waiting, not for a gift, not for flowers, but for a call. A voice. Anything. But all that came was a generic text, "Happy Mother's Day. Hope you're well." My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the screen. That was it. No call. No visit. No warmth. The silence after that message was louder than thunder. I told myself he was busy. A grown man with obligations. Maybe he meant to call later. Maybe. But the call that came 3 days later was not what I had hoped for. It wasn't filled with affection or concern. It was cold. Clinical. "Mom, we need to talk about the farm," Daniel began, his voice devoid of emotion. "It's time we think practically. You can't handle it anymore. I think we should sell it." The word stung like sleet on bare skin. I was silent for a beat too long. "You think we should sell it? Just like that?" "This land is our legacy, Daniel. It's your father's soul, buried in these fields." He exhaled sharply. "Mom, please. Don't get sentimental. It's worth good money. I could use the funds to invest. It's the smart move." Something inside me broke. Not just from what he said, but from the way he said it. Detached. As if I was some stubborn old woman clinging to a worthless relic. I wanted to scream, to remind him of the nights I stayed up with him through storms, the sacrifices made so he could attend college, the mortgage refinanced twice to pay for his business degree. That night, I sat on the porch swing alone, Thomas's flannel draped around my shoulders like a ghost of comfort. I rocked back and forth, the stars overhead blinking like sympathetic eyes. I whispered to the wind, "Have I really become invisible to the one I raised with every fiber of my being?" The next morning, I walked the land. Each step stirred a memory. The tree where Daniel broke his arm falling from the tire swing. The pond where we taught our golden retriever to swim. The barn Thomas had painted red by hand, humming old country songs with a brush between his teeth. This wasn't just property. It was blood, sweat, lullabies, and goodbyes. I walked for hours that day. Into the fields, up the hill that overlooked the whole property. The wind tugged at my scarf like a familiar hand, as if Thomas himself was encouraging me to breathe deep, to see what had been forgotten. At the top of that hill, where we used to picnic with a thermos of lemonade and homemade pie, I sat and let the silence speak. And I made my decision before the dew had dried. If Daniel saw this place as nothing more than a banknote, then he didn't deserve it. I would not let him commodify our memories. I called the real estate agent, and within weeks, the farm was listed. The offers came quickly. One stood out. A young couple, Sarah and Miguel. With a toddler and another baby on the way. They weren't rich, but they were kind. Their eyes lit up when they saw the barn, and Sarah cried when she walked into the kitchen, touching the windowsill where I once lined up Daniel's art projects. They spoke of raising their children on this land, of planting gardens and teaching responsibility through hard work. It felt right. I spent a long evening with them, walking the fields, sharing stories. Miguel listened carefully when I showed him where the soil was richest, where to plant corn, how to rotate crops with the seasons. Sarah asked for recipes I used to make during harvest time: apple pie, cornbread, chicken stew. Their eagerness wasn't greed, it was gratitude. The final sale price was $212,000. Enough to live comfortably. Enough to start again. When I told Daniel, his voice rose like a storm. "You what? You sold the farm? Without telling me? That was supposed to be mine, Mom." "You made it clear, Daniel," I said calmly, "that I no longer mattered. You wanted the farm for money. I gave it to someone who wanted it for love." There was silence. Then he hung up. The ache of that moment was sharper than I expected. But I didn't cry. Instead, I felt free. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up not just for the farm, but for myself. The following weeks were quiet. Peaceful. I moved into a small cottage on the edge of town. The days were slow, filled with books, birdwatching, and neighbors who waved every morning. I learned how to crochet, joined a gardening club, and made friends with a widow named Ellie who invited me over every Friday for tea and conversation. But my favorite part was the mailbox. Letters came from Sarah and Miguel, photos of their kids painting the barn, growing pumpkins, adopting chickens. Their joy felt like rain after a long drought. One morning, as I was planting tulips, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Daniel stepped out, his face drawn and weary. I stood slowly, dirt on my gloves, heart thudding. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I didn't see what you were trying to protect. I thought I was being practical. But I was just being selfish. I forgot what made that farm special. I forgot who made me who I am." Tears welled up in my eyes. Not just because he finally understood. But because I had hoped, quietly, painfully, that one day he would come back, not for the land, but for me. We sat on the porch, and for the first time in years, we talked. Really talked. About memories, mistakes, forgiveness. I told him about Sarah and Miguel, and how their daughter, Lily, reminded me of him as a boy, always chasing butterflies and asking 100 questions. He smiled through his tears. "You were right to sell it, Mom. I didn't deserve it. But I'd like to visit it one day, maybe even help them out, if they'll let me." And just like that, the cracks in our bond began to mend. We spent the afternoon baking cookies like we used to, laughing about how he always burned the first batch. That night, he stayed for dinner. It was the first time in a long time that I heard my house filled with laughter. In the weeks that followed, Daniel began visiting more. He started helping Sarah and Miguel around the farm on weekends, repairing fences, fixing the old tractor. Something in him softened. Something in me healed. We began again, not as mother and son defined by obligation, but by choice, by love rediscovered. In the end, the farm didn't stay in the family, but its spirit did. It lived on in the laughter of new children, in the soil tilled by hands that appreciated it, and in the renewed relationship between a mother and her son. Sometimes, letting go of the past is the bravest act of love. And sometimes, the greatest gifts on Mother's Day aren't wrapped in paper or delivered in bouquets. Sometimes, they come in the form of understanding, redemption, and the quiet return of the ones you thought you'd lost. And on that note, I've realized one truth more valuable than any piece of land: love, when genuine, is never wasted. It may be overlooked, forgotten, or taken for granted, but it always, always finds its way home. Even in the whisper of the wind. Even in the rustle of old corn stalks. Even in the voice of a child calling, "Mama," from across the field. It always comes home.